Hello, Papa here. We've talked about the stages of mountain building, also called the stages of orogeny. And so now I want to tell you the sediment layers, the diagnostic sediments associated with the Taconic orogeny, the Taconic mountain building event. So let's get started on that. Okay. We said that the first thing you find is that layer of volcanic ash if the wind is blowing from the developing island arc and it's blowing toward the continent, and you get a layer of ash. And in the case of the Taconic mountain building event here in Georgia, we got the Millbrig ash layer that is part of the Chickamauga Formation. In other words, it got mixed in with the Chickamauga limestone. It blew over the continent and drifted and fell down into the shallow ocean where that Taconic Chickamauga limestone was forming, and is mixed up in that formation. Next thing we talked about was the Forebulge, where the weight of the approaching land mass, whether it be a microcontinent, or whether it be an island arc, microcontinent, or continent, pushes down, forms a foreland basin, and that in turn pushes up a foreland bulge on the continent side of the foreland basin. So here for the Taconic, we got the Nox Limestone, which was the Cambrian rifted drift limestone of the Cambrian explosion, got pushed up with the Taconic Forebulge, and that raised it above sea level. One thing it did was it killed all of the sea creatures of the Cambrian explosion. They were killed off, and so that was one of our biggest massive die-offs, of which we have had many in the history of the earth. And that when the land is raised up above the sea and erosion occurs, that's called an unconformity. So this Forebulge is called the Nox Unconformity, and it lifted up this Nox Limestone. The limestone was eroded and karsted, and then later on during the Taconic, or perhaps, basically during the Taconic, that karsted, those caves were mineralized with zinc and lead, and that created a big industry around the Knoxville area. So up in the central United States, the central states, up along the coast, I'm talking about Virginia, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, it was the Elbrick limestone that was raised up and karsted. Same stuff as the Knox, just that's their name for it. And then up in the northern states, New York, Pennsylvania, it was the Millback limestone. Okay, so that's the Forebulge and karsting business. If there's no limestone there, and the Forebulge just creates an unconformity, and there's obviously no karsting. Okay, so then we talked about the Fore Basin, the deep part of the Fore Basin, where you had all the black shale, a layer of black shale. In the south, it was the Athens shale, the Rockmart shale, and the Blockhouse shale. This is further north than Georgia, in the Tennessee area. In the central states, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, it was the Martinsburg shale, the Martinsburg black shale. And then up in the northern states, New York, it was the Utica shale. Remember, this black shale is the very first diagnostic layer that tells you that orogeny is occurring, that a big crashing event is coming. Okay, and now we, along with that black mud in the deep part of the basin, we had limestone forming next to it in the shallow part of this foreland basin, closer to the continent. In the south, we've already talked about, that's called the Chickamauga limestone for the Taconic. Up in the central states, you had the Trenton limestone, and also in the north, the Trenton limestone. Keep in mind, these are all the same layers, basically. It's just in different places you have different names for them. That's not 100% true all of the time, but in most cases it is. Okay, so then comes the erosion phase, where first mud, gray mud, covers fills the basin. A layer of mud is laid down in this foreland basin, and then a layer of sand is laid down in the basin with maybe a mud sand mix in between. In the southern states, there is nothing, because we didn't crash or erode in Georgia. There's nothing. There's no crashing during Taconic here, and so none of this massive erosion. By the way, this part of the cycle where you get all this mass amounts of mud and then sand that fill up this foreland basin, for the Taconic, it's called the Queenston Delta, and the Queenston Delta runs from Virginia, West Virginia, up through Pennsylvania and into New York, and perhaps further north. But we don't have that down here because we didn't have a crashing event that filled our basin with a bunch of sediments. Okay, so that's that prograding of clastic material. Then remember I said there's as part of that eroding of the mud and sand, the last layer of sand is a clean white layer of beach sand. Why is it white? Because it's been cleaned by ocean waves. They pound it, they sort it, and they clean all the iron and other erodible minerals out of it. And this clean beach, just moves across the sand from the crashing site all the way across the entire basin, and forms this huge, massive layer of sand. In the South Tennessee, it's called the Clinch Sandstone. In the central states, Virginia, etc., it's called the Tuscarora Sandstone. And then up north, it's the Tuscarora Sandstone, it's also called the Whirlpool Sandstone at Niagara Falls, and also another name for it's the Albion Sandstone. All these sandstones represent that last final layer of beach sand that tells you that the mountains have eroded down basically to nothing. Next comes relaxation and block faulting and evaporite basin formation, which is the very last phase. And usually, in the case of the Taconic, because of the climate, this has been red beds. In other words, mud and sand that has a lot of iron in it, and because the climate is dry and hot, and this mud and sand is exposed to the air, the iron is oxidized and it all gets turned red. So for the south here, we did get a big amount of that, and that's called the Red Mountain Formation. In Georgia, you find it in the up in the Valley and Ridge province, the remnants of it. It's mostly sandstone there. If you go over to Alabama, Birmingham, it's a mud, which is now a clay or shale layer, and that's that very iron-rich clay of Iron Mountain at Birmingham, Alabama, that formed the basis of their iron industry. This layer of red beds goes all the way up the eastern United States, up and down the eastern United States. In the central states, it's called the Rose Hill Formation, and in the northern states, it's called the Bloomsburg Red Beds. Red beds just means this highly oxidized material that had a lot of iron, and the iron gets oxidized and turns it red. Now, let's look at the Evaporite Basin stuff. You got the salt layers up in New York forming that salt of the Great Lakes, and then that was overlaying by the Lockport dolomite up there. We had dolomite down here in Georgia, but I think it was Cambrian, mostly Cambrian dolomite, the shady dolomite. So dolomite is limestone that's had magnesium added to it, and this forms more readily. Dolomite forms more readily in these hot, shallow seas where there's a lot of evaporation going on, and so you got the Great Lakes salt and dolomite over there, and that was in the Silurian period, which came after the Ordovician period. Ordovician period, which is 500 million to 450 million, that was when the Taconic event proper occurred, and then these relaxational red beds came during Silurian period, the following period, 450 million years to 400 million years. Also, granite plutons were also in place at this time. So those are the products of the diagnostic products of the sediments of the Taconic. And we'll be doing that for each of the 3 big orogenies that occurred in the eastern United States. So I'm thinking about you because you're my rock buddy, one of my rock buddies. And I hope you have a great day, and we'll be talking to you soon. Bye-bye.